and I would like to welcome you to the launch activity for Rose Fass' newest book, The Leadership Conversation. My name is Michael Flanagan, and I am a member also of the Fast Forward team. And I have the pleasure today of being your host, as well as your air traffic controller. Lots of stuff coming our way here, so I will certainly do my best today. Let's do a couple of quick housekeeping items. This session will go approximately 50 minutes or so. We'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions and to put your contributions in. We'll try and flag them and bring them to Rose's attention. Secondly, we have in the background a graphic recorder, an artist, if you will. And this graphic recorder is going to take essential pieces of the conversation and create an artistic rendering, a graphic animation, if you will, for us. And by the end of the week, we'll send this to you, so to kind of memorialize the session, and you'll also have a nice takeaway as well. Feel free, certainly, to participate in the comments section, and we'll do our very best to certainly get to as many questions as we can, and also allow Rose to share, her, why she wrote the book and some of the particulars in the book. Now, Rose, you and I have known each other for going on 20 years, and it's kind of interesting in our background. I was formerly with Verizon Communications, and at the time that I met Rose, I was running the executive development programs for the chairman. And I would see Rose and Gavin quite a bit at the Verizon headquarters. Actually, I think they had a lot of business at that point in time. It became really an essential, partner in leadership development, and so a rich history there. So Rose is the CEO of the Fast Forward Consulting Group, and prior to that, had stints with Gartner and was a former C-suite executive, reporting into Anne Mulcahy, quite a well-known leader in the business world for many years as a chief transformation officer. And so, Rose, I don't want to steal your thunder. I would like to just have you come on and tell us a little bit more. You've obviously had many conversations. You've got your title of your first chapter is a 50-year conversation. And along with that, those experiences that I just cited, you also have a great deal of wisdom to share with us, much of which is in your newest book, The Leadership Conversation. So, Rose, can you kind of give us a little more color commentary?
Yeah, thank you. Before I do, I just want to say thank you for all joining us and for joining me in this conversation. I'm usually on a stage or somewhere in the middle of a room with all beautiful people around me, and I get a lot of energy from that. And I'm picturing all of you, and many of you are friends, and many of you are colleagues that we've known over the years, and some of you are people I've yet to meet, but I look forward to it, and I look forward to this conversation, and we really do want it to be two-way. So a little bit about me. You always bring yourself into a room and you think the bio sounds so amazing, you're a big piece of stuff, but actually I grew up in East Utica, New York, a child of Italian-American parents who were children of immigrants, Depression children. My dad was a World War II Marine. For those of you who know and love me, you've heard me speak of him often. He actually died upon the time that I was publishing the first book, but he got to read the manuscript. And, Dad was a guy who was conversant in the Romance languages because he cared that people be heard and that they would actually understand and he would be listening, and it was all a big part of it. It's in the first chapter of the book. He was a World War II Marine who told us one thing: be up at 0600 and ready for company. And that covered a lot of things. So we grew up with the understanding that by 6 o'clock in the morning, if we were dressed and ready for company, we could be prepared for whatever conversations came our way. And that led to a lot of who I became later in life, both my parents. My mom could do more over a cup of tea than most therapists can do in an office. She was a deep listener, deeply intuitive. My father was more analytical and philosophical, and I think I got a little bit of both. And he was also a published poet. So I think about my own life, and I say to Michael, a bit of the warrior and a bit of the poet. So I think you'll see a lot of that in the book. The book is a series of stories. I'm kind of a natural storyteller. And the 50-year conversation just takes you through my life from being a young child up to where I am today as a soon to be 74-year-old woman. And I think that's where the wisdom comes. You know, Dad used to use this thing from George Bernard Shaw, too bad youth is wasted on the young. Never understood it then. I do now, because I realized that you know so much more and you're a lot less concerned about your flaws when you get older. So that's a little bit about me, Michael, and it was wonderful that we had the opportunity to meet 20 years ago and start that conversation. And when you retired from Verizon, it seemed like a natural fit for you to come over and join our tribe and our family.
Yeah, it's a perfect home for me. It's going on 4 years now, and I'm just actually absolutely thrilled. I still can't get over that you're getting close to 74 years old. It's like the old quip, hey, I'll have what she's having. She looks great. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Rose. So this is your second book. The first book, The Chocolate Conversation, seemed to kind of take a life of its own. It was such a beautiful metaphor for conversations that just don't land anywhere, right? And in your second book, you also put a quote from George Bernard Shaw. The problem with the communication is the illusion that it's actually happened.
Yeah.
And so I think this kind of gets into both books. So tell us a little bit more about the sort of the chocolate conversation and how that goes into or feeds into the leadership conversation.
Yeah. So what's interesting is in the first book, many of you read my story. I had gone to a BYOC, a bring your own chocolate party. And that sounded like a lot of fun because, in university, when you go to the BYOBs, you're holding the drink and you're trying to be, cool and you're trying to figure out what to do. This party was intriguing to me because I figured I'm going to be with a bunch of chocolate lovers. How good can it get? So I brought my killer chocolate cake only to find out that I was on the low end of the convection scale. There were elaborate desserts. And I met this one woman who was extremely thin, the kind you really would love to love, but you hate. Anyway, one guy was talking about his favorite nighttime snack was a Snickers. And she was saying, are you kidding? My chocolate has to have a certain amount of cacao and it has to be just perfect. And I don't want to waste the calories if it's not. By the time we got through, I was like, oh my God. Years later, I was at an all-company meeting at Xerox, actually, and the then CEO, not Ann, was giving a new strategy. And he thought he was being very clear. And everyone left that room with a different interpretation. And he was very disappointed. It was the new Xerox. We were becoming the document company. No one understood what that really meant at the time. And so everybody got hauled back in that was in a leadership position to kind of question us as to what happened. And it was then that I realized, hey, we're having a chocolate conversation. I sort of swung back to that party and I thought, we're having a chocolate conversation. The worldview was very well understood. We're going to be the document company, but the standards for how every function was going to fulfill that particular strategy were very different. And then people got concerned about what it really meant. How did that change us from being the copier company, Michael, to the document company? And we started out with a monk that said it's a miracle when you made a copy. And then we had these new age sort of Greek and different people circling around. And we actually had customers writing in and saying, are you changing religions? I mean, it was hilarious. Big chocolate conversation. So that was the impetus for me to start to think about how does communication break down? On my first team, I met a young man when I was an early sales manager who said, I was in a room with a bunch of customers. We were all speaking English, but it was as though we needed a translator. And I often think about that remark. I think communication, even at its very best, breaks down. And chocolate conversation gave us the opportunity to call it out and to be able to unpack these and kind of try to reduce them. You won't get rid of them altogether, but try to reduce them by making your standards clearer and by making your concerns about why you have this different worldview. And if it's a concern about your market changing or your business model changing because you need to be competitive and stay ahead, then you have to express that concern first, what you're solving for, and why this new worldview is coming about. So I'm going to close out with this. Steve Jobs started always with what he considered to be the concern. So let's take a real example. At a time when the world was feeling pretty down, he thought people needed entertainment. They needed to have an escape. And he provided the iPod, where most affectionately known to all of us as 1,000 songs in our pocket. And that turned into a new standard for the industry and reshaped the worldview. And I learned from that time that doing the bottoms up approach, not coming out with your worldview, because that often invites people to argue with you, but to start with the concern that you have, what you're thinking about, maybe a new standard that you're going to put in place, and how that informs a different worldview. So that's the chocolate conversation, and we'll talk a little bit more about the new book as we go further. But I see some things coming in.
Some of the comments I'm monitoring. I don't see any questions, but as in the audience, please put anything in here so that we can ask Rose as she talks a little bit more about the book and sort of the concepts and philosophy behind the leadership conversation. What resonated with me, Rose, is I spent many years in kind of change management, and we always sort of thought that resistance was a leading indicator, right, of in your case, right, of a chocolate conversation. If we didn't get at the core of the resistance, if we didn't understand what those concerns was, back to your comment about, start at the bottom, understand, what those concerns, surface those concerns so that you can then proceed to have a leadership conversation or a clearer, cleaner, conversation, as well. So.
Yeah, I think what happens with people, I mean, I don't love change. Everybody, tabs me as a change agent. I don't even like you to change my seat at my dinner table. Or when I go into a restaurant, I want the same table. I mean, it's very interesting. Or you go to a different country and you look for similarities to the country you come from. It's a natural thing for us to try to find ways in which we can be comfortable, ways in which we can bring ourselves some peace, particularly now in the world that we're living in. I mean, it is really difficult today. So whatever comfort you can get, you try to get. So change is not something that we necessarily gravitate to or create. It's something that happens to us. The pandemic was a change that happened to us. It gave me the opportunity to really have the time and space to write this second book. Because while I was working remotely, I had in between times that I would normally be running down a hallway or running from meeting to meeting. And I used that time to sort of jot down different thoughts in this book. One of them was, how do we, and I know when Gavin and I started the company years ago, I had a dream. I had a dream that commerce could trump conflict. That somewhere along the line, the Davos, the Economic Forum in Davos, the Aspen Institute, all the aspirational forums in which we were talking about the global economy, that the global economy would take precedence over global conflict, like the one we're seeing in the Ukraine. I felt as though business leaders had to step up and step in where the global leaders were not on the public stage. End the vitriol, get back to some civil discourse, figure out a way to make prosperity something that everyone in a global economy could enjoy, irrespective of where they sat on the food chain. And I know that's a big dream, but I felt like if every one of us could participate in those bold conversations that we need to start having, that we need to start changing the conversation that's going on right now that's so vitriolic, that we could begin to make that kind of really great transformation that would turn things around, that would get people to a different place. And that's really what this book is about. The 50-year conversation in the first chapter is to say there were many events in my long life that were troubling. And recessions and odd and even gas lines, 9/11. Gavin and I started the company and 9/11 happened. Certainly this unprecedented pandemic, everything that's going on. And when I look to leadership and I look to the kind of conversations that I would love to see more of, I think of Zelensky. You know, here's a man who stepped up and stepped into a leadership moment in such a perfect way. He was attacked. We were offering him escape. And his response to that was, I don't need a ride. I just need weapons so I can protect and defend my country. What a moment. What a moment. And that bold conversation has riveted itself all across the world. So there's a real example, and there are many more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that line will go down as like a Churchillian type of line. You know, I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. We need ammunition. So
right.
Great shout out. We have a question from Jim O'Bray. By the way, Jim also grew up east of Utica, and he just asking the question like, what inspired you to write these books, and did it energize you or exhaust you?
A little bit of both, Jim. Obviously, when you're writing a book, you know, it's like a PhD once told me that when somebody asked him how it was going about getting the PhD, he said, you know, that's like, how's your illness coming? It was exhausting, but I was energized every time I finished a particular chapter and I read back on it and realized I had memorialized someone or something that mattered to me in my life. I've had a lot of wonderful mentors in my life, wonderful experiences. In this second book, I started out, quite frankly, Jim, writing that 50-year conversation. That did not exhaust me. It was like a memoir. And I got to write about men and women who had such an impact on my life, some of whom are not here anymore. They're on the other side. They've passed away. But they left an indelible mark on my life. And for me, it was memorializing them and making them live through this book once again, and to be able to share those stories with people that are coming into this leadership world in this new generation, that it just might shed some light on what it means to have those kind of mentors and those kind of conversations. So yeah, sometimes they were exhausting and it energized me as well. It's a paradox.
Well, great. And thanks for the question, Jim. Marcus has got a little bit of a shout out, Marcus Dimbleby. He said it was fabulous to have Rose join us on the Thinking Leader podcast. Listen to more of her great wisdom and insights, and he puts a link for those. So just kind of, call that.
Thank you, Marcus. And he's a delight. If you ever get a chance, one of my favorite books is Red Teaming. And Bryce Hoffman wrote that and Marcus is part of his company, and they're just an incredible, great team to get strategy straight. And you meet worthy colleagues along the way. Jim O'Bray, all of you that are on this particular podcast that I know, you're worthy colleagues. And what do I mean by that? We are iron sharpens iron. We're from the same tribe. We think the same way in that we care about people, relationships, and conversations, and we believe we can change that conversation by being a part of it. So thank you for being on. I appreciate it, Marcus.
Yeah, well, Rose, it's apparent that you have a calling. So Pia De Lima has a comment here, Rose. So I'm going to try and unpack it a little bit. But the gist is changing the conversation can be unpopular, right? Many leaders of some entities lack courageous decision making. It's marred by the political pandering rather than the business right thing to do. How do you navigate? I mean, that's like the essence of your book, right? How do you navigate this environment?
Yeah, and it is difficult, and I grew up in it. So Pia, I understand. I think the fear of decision making is often the fear of no longer being liked, no longer being respected. If I make the wrong decision, I risk failure. People who think like that have not really yet arrived at a leadership position or a leadership moment, and they're not having leadership conversations. Most of the people that I worked for that were like that were people that knew how to manage work, but they didn't know how to lead people. There's a certain amount of risk in making yourself vulnerable. And being able to do that is often very difficult. So how do you navigate that? Oftentimes when I'm dealing with a highly politicized environment, I will have the conversation about the conversation before I actually have the conversation. So it might go like this, you're a highly respected leader. People think very, very highly of the work that you have done, some of what you've been able to produce. There's some things that aren't quite going in the right direction. How are you feeling about that? Or getting a person to engage in a conversation, not in a conflicted way, but where you make it less about who's right and more about what's right. So we change the principle. And instead of fixing blame, we look to fix a problem. And those, you're going to have bosses along the way that unfortunately aren't ever going to change. So you work around it and you do your damnedest to do the most that you can do to change that conversation and to be around people who want to change it with you. Because the more you get a critical mass, the more you can push back. Most transformations happen middle out. They don't happen because somebody from the top comes down and makes it all better.
Good. Thank you for the question, and thank you, Rose. Yeah, I think some of that is pretty the essence of chapter 3, which is leadership happens in the conversation, or not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. We have another question from Karen Combe, and Karen says, "Can you let us know what are the top 3 takeaways you would select from your book?" Good question.
Yeah. Karen, it's great to see you, darling. It's been a while. Karen is also one of my early mentors and colleagues, and it's just wonderful to have you here. So top 3, the first one is, how do you unpack a chocolate conversation? And there's a whole thing on it, but that's a big takeaway for people to recognize them and know how to unpack them. The second one is how to work in 3 spheres. The technical, the social, and political. You've heard a lot about that in the past, Karen, and our technical expertise, our social networks, and our political standing. And I don't mean politicking. I mean our political standing, our ability to position things, to be both credible, likable, and plausible. Those things are very important. And that's the second takeaway. And the third one is, how can you have a civil discourse and not necessarily agree with the popular opinion? Can you turn conflict into a civil conversation? That's actually in the last chapter of the book. Major takeaway, keep it civil. So I would say those are the 3, Karen, in this book that I think are worth taking away.
Great. Thank you again for the question. Yeah, Rose, I think so much to your point, and it's featured in chapter 10, the public square and civil discourse. The challenge with this is emotions. These are emotionally charged, often, conversations, and like it or not, we're mammals first and rational decision makers second, right? So how do you kind of get through that stuff where you can lower the temperature and actually have this civil discourse that you're talking about?
Yeah. I'm going to bring in a dadism. My father used to say, if you have to shout, you can't stand up to your side of the argument. I never forgot it. It's like shouting is a way to back down from standing up to your side of the argument. I think being passionate is wonderful. I'm a very passionate person, and I love when people show emotion and passion. When it turns into anger and vitriol, there's something else going on. It's not just the other person having a different opinion. It's something that you feel is attacking something very personal in you. And I think that's when we have to sort of ask for a pause, get some level bodies, lower the temperature a little, bring the decimal down, and recognize if I'm shouting, and talking over someone, I've left the conversation. I'm no longer engaged. I'm having a dueling monologue, not a conversation.
Okay, great. A great response. And thank you again for the question. We have another question, Rose, from a LinkedIn user that is not identified, and it's just just the protocol here. But it says, "Hi, Rose. I feel so fortunate to have been able to work with you and Gavin at Verizon for years. Now I'm at Expedia and wondering if you have thoughts or actionable advice on managing and crafting message clarity for the teams when there is often so much message, ambiguity."
Yeah. Obviously, Gavin, my founder, my co-founder and partner, has spent a lot of time in this area in what he calls the art of storytelling, the ability to build a narrative that has all of the technical, social, and political aspects covered. And you have what is a hook, something that invites people in to the discussion, meat, substantive, absolute evidence that supports your premise, and a payoff, which then allows people to see what's in it for me. Very often, if you look at conversations, whether they're happening in a PowerPoint deck or they're happening in a exchange between people, people jump right into the meat. They don't open up with any kind of a hook or any kind of a, let's just bring you into this conversation. And then there's no real payoff. I often say in presentations in particular, the title slide is what they consider to be the beginning of the presentation. And the payoff is that word, thank you, at the end. Not really a great way to do it. So if you're trying to craft a message, think about it. Think about what's going to be the one or two sentences that are going to invite somebody into this conversation. What's going to draw them in? And then Gavin once used an example of a TED Talk where here are 3 arguments on a way to a discussion. You immediately want to find out what that's all about, right? And then being substantive, making sure that you have the right facts and evidence and data to support what your premises or your hypotheses, and then the what's in it for the person that's engaged with you. That's the way to craft a good message. And if you want to know more about that, you can attend some of our virtual learnings, which really get into all of it. And whoever you are, somehow we just got you as a LinkedIn profile. I'm sure we enjoyed working with you too.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Good. Thank you again for the question. And by the way, chapter 8 in the book is called Message Discipline. I'm just going to put a little bit of an add-on to that. Once you craft the message, once you are able to skillfully do that, it's really important to stay on message. It's really important to be disciplined. And so often what happens, and you talk about this in the book as well, is we get off message. And what happens is then you end up in a chocolate conversation at the end of the day.
One of my favorite books, which is interesting, that deals with this. I talked about red teaming, but Bryce Hoffman also wrote this book called The American Icon, and it reads like a novel. But he talked about Alan Mulally when he would go in front of Wall Street and give guidance, and they kept saying, that's the same guidance that you gave us the last time you were up. And he said, why would it be any different? This is the plan that I put out there. These are the messages that I've given my people and my customers, and I am staying on message. Gavin came up with this whole premise of message discipline. And I realized when he was talking about it, it was very much aligned with where I felt people needed to unpack chocolate conversations. Message discipline drives operational discipline. When people do not or are not clear about what it is that they're being directed to do, they will do what is the default strategy rather than the strategy. So it's really important to understand that if somebody doesn't have the operational discipline you're looking for, it's usually upstream a little on the lack of message discipline.
Okay, great response. Gopal has a really terrific question here as well. And given your background as the former Chief Transformation Officer for Xerox. The question is, transformations about changing mindsets and not changing people. What advice do you have on these conversations, on how to have those conversations to change mindsets and not
Yeah.
people?
So it's interesting. I think you go for the heart first. So we talk about changing minds and hearts at Fast Forward. I think the way you change a conversation is you talk about what's really important to the individual. If they disagree with you, find out why. Always know what's behind it and keep asking why until you really uncover that. Then I think you have the opportunity to talk about what it would look like if we did go down this path. Because the way you change a mind is people have to see things differently to do them differently. And if you don't make it clear so someone can see it differently, experience it in the heart, feel it differently, then they are not going to do it differently. They won't change their minds. They'll be of the same opinion.
Good, good. So the message here is message discipline drives operational discipline. Thank you, Rose, and thank you, Gavin. Rose, during the 2 years you wrote the book, we kind of characterize our life, I think, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. We went to either hybrid, remote, complete, or all sorts of variations of this, and that's brought upon a unique set of circumstances in terms of messaging communication, because over remote and over technology, we often miss some of the cues, right, that we would have had the benefit of face to face. So how does sort of the leadership conversation, how does this work when you have a hybrid and remote workforce in order to have these conversations that are already going to be somewhat challenging?
I'm going to kick this off with a little bit of a preface. When David, Gavin, myself, Sally, all of us here at Fast Forward were listening to the beginning conversations around the pandemic, they spoke of social distancing. And I thought, wow, that's a bad connotation. We need to physically distance ourselves so that we didn't give each other the COVID, but we shouldn't be socially distant. And I kept changing that conversation with everyone I spoke to. Be physically distant, don't be socially distant. Then I came up with, and Gavin always gets a kick out of me with my one-liners, as Sally and David do too, but it's kind of like, remote doesn't mean removed. It gave someone who was introverted the opportunity to put a head down and not come up for a while. And there's nothing wrong with being an introverted leader, but you cannot be removed. You have to stay connected. So one of the ways in which we did at Fast Forward adopted something is to say, we all went home. We thought we were going home for 2 weeks. We obviously were home for a lot longer, but we said, let's do Mondays, what's on your plate? And let's do Fridays, what's on your mind? Just take an hour on the two ends of the week. And that just gave people a way to interact. That was just one idea. The intent of getting on a Zoom meeting or on a Google Meet or on Microsoft Teams or Blue Jeans or any number of these platforms is to be able to kick off the meeting with a little bit of touch before you get into the task. We teach that whole touch and task, but touch first. Go around. What's going on for each of your people, and not in a check the box kind of way, in a real way. Maybe start out with something vulnerable about you, and then let everybody have that opportunity and then get into the work. But staying connected is important. David Frost, who heads up our coaching practice, has a wonderful thing where he does no agenda check-ins. And he just spends 15, 20 minutes picking up the phone, calling each person and just checking in with them. It's a wonderful way to stay connected. As leaders, you learn a lot when you check in with people. And if everything is done formally, you miss the nuance, Michael, and you miss what's happening around us and the back channel feedback that's going on that you used to pick up in the halls. So the best way to pick that up is to have an informal conversation every once in a while. Now, people are going to say, Rose, you've always said, don't ever, as a leader, you have to not have a casual conversation. Casual and informal are different. Casual are fly-by conversations that do not have thought, that sometimes can set you down a bad path. An informal conversation is one in which you show empathy and humanity. Big difference. So I just want to make that distinction before somebody comes up with a, hey, Rose, you always said once you become a leader, you don't ever have casual conversations, because people take you too seriously.
Yeah. No, I think it's that much more important, particularly during the pandemic, and there were a lot of, starts and misstarts and everything. But fact of the matter is, we as leaders, as business leaders, consultants, whatever you're doing, we're dealing with people, living, breathing people who have fears and foibles and aspirations and dreams. And with the pandemic, those things were exponentially more top of mind. And so
Absolutely.
I think those leaders who did have those check-ins, and as Jim O'Bray says, connection over content, you forge a different type of relationship, and it's not transactional, and that's a good way of phrasing it. Rose, we have a comment from Sarah Nunez, and Sarah and I used to work together many years ago at Verizon. She says, can't wait to read the book. What is your advice to ensure a customer-centric mindset when transformation is critical to driving operational discipline?
When operational?
When transformation, okay, let me repeat it. I'll go slower. What is your advice to ensure or maintain a customer-centric mindset when transformation is critical to driving better operational discipline?
Yeah, better operational discipline. Sarah, don't take this the wrong way, but I look at that customer-centric phrase, and a lot of companies are using it. And I think to myself, when did that come into vogue? And at 74 years old, I can tell you that I can go all the way back to where people were saying customer first, or let's be very focused on the customer. And the idea of the customer is that's who we're doing business with. And I love that you know that, Sarah, that you can't have a transformation that deals strictly with your internal operations without including the customer. Because otherwise we're not in business, we're playing office. And a lot of companies play office, and it's very unfortunate, because the whole purpose that we exist is that somebody out there chooses to do business with us. So I think to even have to say that we are customer centric means we're not. We need to be in a place where the customer is so much a part of the fabric of what we are, what we want to do business based on. I think of Stephen Jobs at Apple. It was never talked about as being customer centric. The company lived to change the conversation in the industry to give customers a better experience. Great brands have relationships with their customers, and they have a customer in point of view versus a customer out. And that doesn't mean that they don't think beyond what the customer is asking for today. It simply means they're evaluating it all the time. They're always thinking about what's the customer going to want from us down the line, something they never thought they needed and now can't live without. And the big brands that have really nailed this just see the customer as the center of their ecosystem, and they don't even talk about it. It's in the fabric of their business. I think of something a CMO said to me, John Bridges, who's the CMO at Chick-fil-A. He said, what's it like to be a brand that people can't live without? So you think of Amazon, how many of us would be in a whole lot of hurt if we couldn't do that one click? Because they're essential to our very being. And I don't think they necessarily have to talk about being customer centric. Their whole business model, their whole ecosystem is based on the interaction and the conversation with the customer. So I think you're on the right stack of mail, Sarah, and I think one of the first things we do is change the mindset around, we don't have to talk about being customer centric. We have to be engaged in a business with our customers and listening to them so that we're not playing office.
Yeah, good advice. We have a question from Sarah Gretzko. Sarah says, I'd love to understand more about how we as leaders can influence executives that we work with to be more deliberate about framing conversations, because so often what happens is these conversations spin around, right? And then you have to have follow-up meetings and everything else to get the real sort of the skinny, if you will, on the message. And thanks for that, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And Sarah, you have a natural gift for connecting with others. It's using the spheres. One of the things that I find is when you want to get an executive to think differently, you don't start with what they're not doing right. You start with what they're doing that's really making a difference. And when you kick in with that and say, you know, you have so much to offer, and what you've got here is pure gold. And I'd love to run it by each other so that when you put it out there, people get the most out of it, and we don't have to keep going back because they don't understand. This is just really, really good stuff. So that opens the conversation up to have a dry run with you, to have a little bit back and forth, and to say, okay, technically, what do we want to get across? How do we connect and make this relatable to the people that we're talking about? How do we position it in a way that it feels as though it'll be an easy transition from where we are today to where we want to go? We have to connect a lot of dots in these conversations. And it's lonely being an executive, and a lot of executives don't have someone to think with. So when you offer to think with somebody and you do it in the right way, they welcome it. They welcome it. And I don't often think we take that risk because we're so afraid that if we go in and offer our help, it's going to be rejected. Why not? You try it, you walk in, but you always start out with something really positive that gives that executive the opportunity to say, hey, this person really cares, wants to talk with me, wants to help me. I'm in, I'm all in.
Good. Okay, let's see here. You have in a section in your book called The Artful, in one of the chapters called The Artful Conversation, right? And I do think it is an art, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about what is an artful conversation? How do you have one?
Yeah, so can I give you an example? I don't know how many people have watched Hidden Figures. It's my absolute favorite movie. And this isn't about Catherine. This is actually about one of the other women of color, Mary Jackson. And she wanted to be a NASA engineer really badly, but never thought it was even possible. And she was working for a Jewish engineer who had been a survivor of the Holocaust. And he told her that she had to go take some classes at an all-white high school, Hampton High School, so she could start to get certified for the engineering position at NASA. And she was just like, how's that ever going to happen? No Negro woman, in that, those were the terms they used in that time, would ever be accepted at an all-white high school. This is the most artful conversation. If you ever want to see an artful conversation, I want you to watch Hidden Figures and watch this little clip from Mary Jackson. She walks into the courtroom, and oh, by the way, this is true. This was a very well enacted movie. And when she comes in, the judge looks surprised when he sees her because he didn't realize that this was going to be a woman of color coming to him. And he said, what would precipitate a Negro woman going to an all-white high school? The federal law is not the Virginia law, and our law is the law. And he had been brought up with this worldview, and he thought it was perfectly normal. What I loved about Mary Jackson is instead of going into the mouth of the beast, she was very artful. She said to him, I believe there are extenuating circumstances, Your Honor. And he said, what could possibly be the circumstance that would warrant this? And she said, may I approach the bench? First artful move. She didn't want the people in the gallery overhearing so that the judge would feel somewhat exposed. And he allowed it, and she came up to the bench. And the first thing she started with were all of the things about him. She said, Your Honor, you were the first man in your family to become a Navy man, to be part of the military. You were the first man to go to university. You were the George Mason. You were the first judge to be recommissioned by 3 other judges. She went through this whole thing. And she said, and Alan Shepard will be the first Navy man to go into space. And I, unfortunately, have no choice but to be the first. I can't change the color of my skin. So today in this courtroom, you're going to listen to 100 cases. Which one of them is going to make you the first? What a beautiful, artful conversation. And the judge looked at her and he chuckled a little bit, true story. And he said to her, only the night classes, very quietly, so that no one heard. And you see the look on her face, which was like, I can't believe I won the day. And she could only go to the night classes anyway, because she's working during the day. But that's an artful conversation. She reframed that man's worldview by taking him off of the bias and the practice that had been instantiated in the South for years and putting him into a different place, which is, I've always been first. She played to his ego. I can be first again. That's an artful conversation.
Sure is.
And I can point out a number of them. If you watch Gilded Age, many of you probably have seen it, but if you haven't, stream it. There's a conversation between a son and his father. Phenomenal, artful conversation. You don't always get this stuff out of leadership books or out of business books. A lot of times you get it out of just watching things on movies and different things and watching the way in which people interact. It's using the technical, social, and political spheres at its finest.
Great, awesome. Thanks again for the what a wonderful story, and that is true.
I love it. I love it when I watch it. I still cry.
Yeah, we actually have used that in some of our work as a sort of a kind of a way for people to understand the power of stories and how they play out in real life and in corporations or small businesses, what have you. So Rose, we're getting close to the end of the session, and why do you want people to buy this book? Why do you want people to read this book? And what do you hope will happen, a change of some sort, by people buying and reading and understanding this message?
Yeah, so for me, all of us have a certain amount of spendable income, and we have this wonderful 99-cent promotion going on. So if you're at the point where you're thinking, I've got a budget, that's a really inexpensive way to get this. So however you get it, either in the hard copy or if you get the Kindle version, I want people to read it so that I can hear their thoughts, so that they can begin to be part of a conversation that we need to have in this world right now. I started with my dream. I believe that business leaders are the last value-added space. Unfortunately, I think our institutions have failed us in a lot of ways. Our governments are not where they need to be. They're operating very, very immaturely. And it's like watching a fist fight, and I'm tired of it. I'm hoping that a group of really committed leaders, and even if you don't have a leadership position, but you have the ability to influence, that you are willing to read this and think about ways in which you can spread the word that we can change the conversation that's going on in the world today. We have a generation of people that are growing up under us. I have 4 granddaughters about to graduate from college, 2 this year, 2 next year. I have a beautiful grandson that's not even 2 years old. I don't want them to grow up in a world where they can't admire their global leaders. I want them to grow up in a world where they can have really substantive conversations, not dueling monologues. They don't shout at each other, that there is a genuine human desire to do things differently. And the last thing I'm going to say on this, being a leader does not mean having the biggest name on an org chart. If you have to throw your org chart around, or what you're in charge of, or your title, obviously you don't have what you think you have. I loved it in Game of Thrones when he told that little prickly king, if you have to tell everybody you're the king, you're not the king. I think that we can lead through influence. I think we can lead through having a substantive conversation. I think we have a huge opportunity to do that together. And I want to continue this conversation with you, either offline or, doesn't have to be on a LinkedIn event. Please write to me, give me your thoughts, your insights. I'd love it. So that's why I want you to read it. I want you to read it so that you'll join me in this quest to change the conversation globally so that our children and grandchildren can grow up in a better world. If that makes any sense to anybody, it does to me, and that's my real desire.
Yeah, that's awesome. And by the way, you often say one of your sort of sayings is leadership is messy, right? There are just multiple stories, scenarios, live interactions that you've had over the years that are highlighted in the book about messy situations and messy conversations. And so I think these stories and these live interactions, or how you've recounted those in the book, will give sort of everyone an opportunity to see how this plays out in actual conversations. As we getting ready to close, I just want to sort of make my own personal comment, is that, I've been in leadership development for many years myself, and I've always used the term disproportionate impact, right? Leaders have a disproportionate impact on the lives of those that they have the privilege of leading, right? And if you sort of have the conviction, like you just shared with us, right, that is a calling, right? And if you have that conviction, chances are you might have more of these leadership conversations, these courageous conversations. Why? Because if you believe in something and you are a leader, right, and you understand the influence you have and that disproportionate impact that you could have, it would make a world of difference in our world and in our businesses. So let me just take a real scan here and see, Rose. Okay, lots of bravos and makes sense and wonderful. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close up in a second, but Rose mentioned we have a Kindle offer. It's 99 cents through the rest of the week. We're going to put up, I believe it's a QR code here. You can get this on the book site, the leadershipconversationbook.com, as well as the Fast Forward site, or by scanning the QR code. For those of you who are Kindle readers, 99 cents is pretty much a steal, isn't it? Okay. And then as a reminder, we will also have a follow-up. Remember, I mentioned we have a graphic recorder in the background. It's going to create an artifact, if you will, an asset that is a sort of a kind of summary of some of the key points here, some of your questions, as well as some of Rose's answers. And so let me just make sure we don't have any final comments. Just basically kudos and thank you, Rose. And
thank you. I want to thank everybody here because I know what it's like to give up an hour, and it's much appreciated. We love all of you and are very grateful to have you as part of our extended group here at Fast Forward. So keep the conversation going. It's not too late to buy someone a lovely Valentine's Day present. The book is really beautiful. I'm proud to say that Eugene Hune, who is our designer here, designed the book in this beautiful blue. And it has a lot of the yin and the yang on it. It's a great looking book. So even if you don't read a lot, I kept it brief. Mark Twain hypographically said, if you had more time, you'd write a shorter letter. I tried to put it in a very condensed way because we don't have time to read books that are this size anymore. It's difficult unless they're really compelling. But I'd love for you to read the book, and if you just want to keep it on your counter or whatever, and people come along and they can see it and they want to participate in it. But thank you so much. I appreciate the support, guys. And I often say this before I go to Shady Oaks, and Bryce will laugh about this because I've been talking about Shady Oaks for years. But I'm hoping one day I'll be rocking in this rocking chair in Shady Oaks, and I'll see that conversations are changing and that we've all had a part of that we've all been a part of that. Thank you for being with me on my journey.
All right. Thank you, Rose. Ladies and gentlemen, Rose Fass. And Rose, congratulations on the book. We look forward to learning more as you get into more podcasts and more launch activities. And for those of you, again, who joined us, our thanks. Rose's point, right? Your attention, your time is a most valuable resource, and we respect that, and we're grateful for it. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Bye, everyone.
Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you.